Welcome to the Lab Report, a new series produced by Cincinnati Lab Theater. Each episode, we will explore different topics regarding theater featuring lab company members and special guest artists. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 3 of the Lab Report, Diversity in Theater. I am your host, Tori Pate. In this episode, we will discuss the role of diversity in theater and what we are doing as an industry to help strengthen that role. Well, hi everyone. I'm so glad you are all here. Let's go ahead and get some introductions going. We have Gina Kleesaddle, who is a freelance director and an artist educator at the School for Creative and Performing Arts. We have David Choate, who is the producing artistic director of Revolution Dance Theater. We have Heather Meyer, who is a playwright and a comedy writer. And we have Jazz McMullen, who is a performer and a member of Cincinnati Lab Theater. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here with us this evening.
You.
All right, let's get to it. So tonight's topic is diversity in theater. What do we mean by diversity?
I think for me, when I think of diversity, I think of representation. So when I go to the theater, am I going to see myself represented? And that can be many different ways. It could be as a Black man, it could be as a gay man, it could be as, any number of things in which, we kind of like intersect with our identities. However, I think thinking through those kind of like lenses, it becomes a little bit of a challenge because it's like, oh, is that diversity kind of like represented? Or if somebody does representation well in one area, does that necessarily mean that they do it well in another? So for someone to say that they are diverse, you could be tapping into like one of those, segments, but not necessarily doing so well in the other. So I think it could be broad, but I think that there's room for us to, include it all.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, having been around for a long time, we used to go, "Ooh, look at my diverse cast," and so you had 2 Black people in there, and we thought that's good. But it's not just enough to have those people there. I think we now understand those people have to be being themselves, not just, oh, I happen to cast an Asian person, that people need to be who they are. And I know that Directors Association and Stage Manager Association have been very active in saying we no longer cast people to play what they are not. We no longer line children up and spray them brown and put lines on their eyes and do King and I, So I think true diversity is also that those people being represented are true to them. You allow them to be true to themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And I think a bit to piggyback off of that is not just having people in your cast, but having them in roles of substance. Not completely putting your chorus as, oh look, I've got the Harlem chorus, I've got the all Black chorus here, but you have no people of color in leads, or you have cis people playing trans roles on stage. Those are important things to make sure that we're keeping in mind when we talk about diversity, is that it's not just, okay, hey, threw them in there, but having those roles of substance as well.
I think along with that is also making sure you're making your decision makers not all look the same. Giving directing jobs to people of color or different age backgrounds, sexuality, gender, putting that all into play in the director roles, the designer roles, the administrative roles, realizing that it's not diverse if everybody putting the show together looks the same or has the same background. Even if on stage it looks one way, it has to be internally as well, giving people opportunities that are consistently denied from them.
It's great that you brought that up, Heather, because one of the things I wanted to ask was, how do we make sure that our theaters are not just outward focused in their diversity, in the way that, just putting people on stage? How do we make sure that the entire company is as diverse as it can be? How do we do that?
I think it is as an organization, it's a constant self-interrogation of your roles. Do people still fit in them? For my fellow white people, swallowing some pride and not taking some jobs. Mm-hmm. Or knowing when your time is like, oh, have you done this job for 5 years? Do you need to do it 10 more? Maybe not. Also, like making space, hiring people. Just because you don't know them doesn't mean they're not perfect for this job. Just because they think differently doesn't mean it's not the exact right way you need. It's swallowing your pride as a white person, and I'm speaking as a white person, of like, oh, but this is how it's always been done, but that doesn't mean it's right. So it's like a constant self-interrogation as an organization and an individual, letting go of power, letting go of the fact that you think it should be done. And in the theater, we're crafting these incredible worlds. And if we're at the helm of something, we all have a vision, but also realizing that your vision is in here. Somebody else also has a great vision in their head, and knowing that they're going to realize something awesome and beautiful and cool too. So handing off those awesome roles to other people.
There's a word that we use a lot around revolution, and it's intentional. And I think that is really kind of like the driving way to make sure that you introduce diversity, kind of like not just as a token Black person here or a token insert whatever, on the stage. But if an organization is really intentional about what they're doing, I think that they can accomplish those diversity goals. It's been astonishing when people come to our performances and you see an entire stage full of people of color. And, when I see that, and it's like, I didn't bring these people in from out of town, like they are right here in Cincinnati, and they did pull off this show, and they are incredibly talented. But then to go to other places and spaces where it's completely, everyone looks the same, and it's like, well, we just don't know how to do it. That's when I kind of like call BS, because it's like, no, they exist. It's possible. You don't have, but where are you looking? And are you doing the same things and expecting those different results? Maybe you have to, put a casting call somewhere else. Maybe you have to, make some different phone calls to some people, right? Instead of just always going to the same places and spaces. But in terms of it not even just being on stage, I think the other thing is it has to literally be a core value of yours and something that you want to see happen in your organization. Otherwise, it will always be, oh, wait, did we cast anybody in that? Okay, let's roll back and let's throw one or two in there, But I think it's easier to do. It's easier to live if it's something that you believe.
The Stage Manager Association had a really interesting discussion about why is the upper level of theater, whether it's Broadway or in any city, why is it so white? And why is stage management so white? And it was a really very honest discussion. People saying, particularly something like stage management, oh, you need an ASM, so you call someone you know who you've worked with before, and it just keeps perpetuating the same kind of people coming in. And so, like you're saying, you have to reach beyond your comfort zone and find those other stage managers or ASMs of color and say, yeah, they can be just as good, just haven't worked with them before. Doesn't mean anything. And I said, and all that's 100% true. But I also think that we need to speak to the educators in this country, because if you're not educating people to become Black performers, Black stage managers, Black directors, or whatever diversity you want to choose there, if it's not happening in school, then it's going to be much harder beyond that, right? So white people, I think, really need to look at the young people they're teaching and see, for example, in stage management, those leadership qualities. Oh, yeah, some of my top stage managers have been Black students. Absolutely, right, David? But of course, he left stage management for dance, but really some of my top stage managers are excellent leaders. And I'll even find faculty members that are surprised by that. I'm like, this student has sat in your math class. How do you not see this quality in them? But educators need to challenge themselves to find those students, give them the education that they need so they can be then part of that layer of theater that's making the decisions. You know, and it's a new way of thinking for some people. If your school isn't particularly diverse, like some of the colleges, you've got to like really, I mean, I was lucky at SCPA, but you've got to really reach out and find those students and open up your mind. So we start at that level so that people can move into those jobs.
Continuing in that vein, how do we attract more diverse artists, more diverse audiences? Audiences, especially for theater, tend to be very homogenous. So how do we attract more diverse people for our stages, to be seen on our stages, and how do we attract audience members to come see these wonderful performers that we have finally got on our stages?
I think a big part of that is to make it accessible. Like a lot of times theater it's expensive, you know, to go out to a night of the theater. Now it's not cheap to put on a production, but there are ways to get around it, you know, to lower ticket prices so that, you know, you can expose more people to it. That's why if you're not exposed to it in the first place, then you're not necessarily inclined to go and see it, and you're not inclined to go and say, oh, that's something that I would like to try to do myself. You know, I always say I wanted to I became a musical theater major because in 4th grade, I saw the production of Fame at SCPA. And from that moment, I said, hey, this is what I need to do. I need to be a part of something like this. Had I not been exposed to that in the first place, you know, then I would never have thought that that was something that I could have wanted to do. And so I think it's more about making theater accessible to begin with. And once it's accessible, then you planted that seed. You get more diverse people who want to come out and be a part of that. Because if it's not something that they know, then they don't know to try to be a part of it.
And to piggyback off of what Jazz said, and I definitely agree, like accessibility is a huge issue in the theater. However, we can't ignore the fact that the Black dollar does exist and it does have a lot of buying power. The problem is that I've seen, and I know from firsthand experience, is I'm not necessarily going to pour money into something that is not feeding me or pouring into me or representing me. The time that we saw the most Black people flocking to the ballet is the first time they had an African-American Clara, you know, and that actually made not city news, not state news, national news. You know, that there's this African-American Clara for the very first time. And it's like, yes, that's something to be celebrated, but then we also have to go, that's the first time, you know. But then you saw an entirely different audience pay the same ticket price as everyone else, right? And come see it. When else do we see an entire African-American audience come into Music Hall? When the CSO does Classical Roots. Put us on stage, we'll come see it. And those ticket prices, exact same, right? You know, but why am I pouring all of my hard-earned money into something that you're not representing me on stage? And so if you're not thinking about me and your decisions, I'm not thinking about you and my buying and purchasing decisions as well.
We always say that art imitates life. If that is the case, why has theater and the performing arts been so white-centric, male-centric, heterocentric for so long?
I would say we have to challenge the phrase art imitates life.
Okay.
Because it clearly has evidence that it doesn't. Art imitates those in power who are traditionally have been male, cis, white, heteronormative individuals, and it imitates their life. So we have to challenge ourselves on things that we just accept are okay, like that phrase, like, oh, this is it. Yes, theater is the lives of humans on stage, but we all know there are gatekeepers that get those shows to stage. and that's whose lives it's imitating. So that's where I come around that question is we have to challenge the fundamental idea that art will win out when there are gatekeepers that are the ones choosing the art.
It takes a certain amount of, I don't know, confidence or stupidity, however you want to look at it, to challenge those powers that have always been in place. I mean, when I was really lucky with my experience in college because I worked under Daryl Anderson at the University of Dayton, who never made the distinction between men and women in the scene shop, in stage management. He literally never did. So I was out of college before I discovered that there were people who thought women shouldn't be stage managers. I was stunned by this realization, and then in fact found there was more of that than not. Now there are more women stage managers, but at that time in the late 70s there were not. And I took a corporate theater show to a theater in Texas, and literally the crew would not come and meet me because I was a woman stage manager. They would meet me on the headsets, but they wouldn't come down and meet me in person, which is normally traditional before you go, because they didn't want a woman to call their cues. And so what everyone said, like when I was interviewing for jobs, is, oh, you have to dress like a man. You need to talk like a man if you want to be a stage manager in this business. Well, I'm not a man. And I didn't even know what that meant. You know, I carried a briefcase, but I mean, I didn't dress like a man. I didn't talk like a man. All I had to offer was me. And it's a hard push, but eventually, you know, people come around and then you pave that way for other people, you know, for other women to move into those spots. But I think in my case, I was just like, well, why wouldn't you want me? I was just like, not so much confident as stupid. But you know, it takes an awareness of, oh, these people don't want me here. So, and I'm sure all of you have been in this situation, whatever your particular thing is. So now you feel like you have to be, I had to stage manage twice as well as any man. You know, it wasn't just enough that I could be a good stage manager. I had to be better than any guy they had. Where a man stage manager could come in and not have those thoughts. And I think about that when we're talking about creating comfortable spaces for people of color and you know, other kinds of diversity, that that person is probably feeling like they have to work extra hard. In reality, they don't. I've hired someone for their talent. But inside, there's probably still that little thing saying, wow, I've got to be better than everybody else to prove that I should be here. And thus we have to not make people feel like they have to prove they have to be there. And that's a difficult thing to get into someone's head and like convince them it's okay. But I think as directors and stage managers, that's where we have to try to connect to our performers of color, or as a director or stage manager of color, whatever, because it's a different, their mind is in a different place.
We are taught at a very young age, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much. That is something that is ingrained in us from the time, you know, we're small children. And it's not so much that, you know, that is something that we try to prove, but because it's part of who we are, we naturally are going to make sure that we are seen, you know, in a light, because hey, even if that's not where our hiring person's mind is, that's just who we are. That's part of our makeup. So you're going to get that, you know, from us, and it's, you know, I think we're better for it.
But is there a way to make those performers relax so that they don't feel like they have to work so hard?
I'm not sure that there is, you know, even now in my role, because I definitely felt it as a performer, and I can be very honest, like even now in my role now in leadership, I try to run the RDT with a very, you know, tight whip, because I still carry that even now. Like, we have to show up as good, if not better, than any of our counterparts, you know. And now that people are starting to take notice and we're getting hired to, you know, perform, you know, for your P&Gs or partner with the CSO or do things like that, it's like my first thought is, we cannot mess this up for the rest of the Black people, you know? So they have to have a good experience, and they have to have a great experience, so they know that if RDT is good, then who else can we hire, you know, things like that. And I'm just not certain that other people come into the room carrying that weight on their shoulders. And I honestly don't know if you can get them not to.
Question for each and every one of you. In your chosen field, do you feel like you are a bit of a trailblazer?
Well, I didn't when I started out. It was only when I looked back. I mean, like I was the first woman stage manager at Carowinds theme park. You know, I'm like, okay, that's weird, but all right. And I'm mostly worried that the dress code said I had to wear heels and hose and my shows were outside, and it was Charlotte in the summer. But looking back, you go, oh, this was when I started to teach my female stage managers. Now look, sometimes you've got to put up with, you know, dirty jokes from the guys because you're working with the guys. And I stopped myself and said, you know what? You don't. Not anymore. You're allowed to set boundaries. But I really didn't think of it at the time. It was only many, many years later when I was training that next generation of stage managers to go, wow, you don't have to go through what I did.
The weirdest and most frustrating thing, and I say weird because it's literally our claim to fame here in Cincinnati, is I know I'm a trailblazer, but I'm not necessarily proud of it. Like, literally, my niche is hiring Black people. And I'm like, wow, that's what gets us noticed, is people can come to expect to see people of color on stage when they come see a Revolution Dance Theater show. And it's like, I almost really want to be put out of business because it shouldn't be hard for other companies to hire people of color. And so when people go like, wow, it's been so long, I can't believe that a company like RDT doesn't exist. And it's like, we will have done our job when we put ourselves out of business. You know, when we're not the only, like our big thing when we get announced is, you know, Cincinnati's only African American dance company in residence at the Aeronaut Center. Great, maybe, you know. So if we're not doing a show, you don't get representation there. Okay, you know. I just really would like for us to be able to go to the theater and see, as you said in the last question, life. See what you see every day. Like, you don't just see, you know, this, you know, one type of person in your everyday life, but unfortunately, that's just not the case. So I've been told that we are trailblazing, and that's what we get, but we're not exactly proud of it in the way maybe we should be.
Well, I don't personally take myself to be a trailblazer. I'm just a performer. I enjoy what I do, and when I get on stage, you get every bit of me that I have. I will say that I do always try to represent for us Husky guys. You know, we can be leading men too. You know, it's like that's one thing that I never shy away from those roles. If there is a role for a leading man available that I can sing, that I can act, I will definitely audition for it because, you know, I that's life. You know, us big guys are romantics too. And so that's one thing, you know, that I always that's kind of my niche. I want to be the I mean, of course I want to be the star, but it's also, you know, like I want people to see that it doesn't always have to be, you know, a small, thin-framed guy, you know, that's heading the show. Like, because at the end of the day, you won't know me from all of the dancer boys because I have been in rehearsal before, I have been in rehearsal afterwards, and I look just as good on stage. And so that's, you know, that's where I take it, you know, like represent for us big guys.
Say I don't consider myself a trailblazer. I'm a female white writer. Has been done, hopefully will continue to be done. However, I do consider myself, I am on the trail, making sure others know that this is a route they can take too. that a trail has been blazed, but that means it's still small compared to a road. It's not Main Street. So I'm definitely like, I am the one that if you say you think you're a writer, I don't care who you are. I'm like, come here, come be in this show with me. Come write jokes for this. Because I believe that everyone is creative. And some people have just gotten opportunities to express it or hone those tools. So I work a lot as a teacher in that way, or not even a teacher, as just, here are the tools that I have. I'm putting together a sketch show. Do you want to do it too? Because I don't want that trail to stop being used. I would love it to get bigger and become, well, like David said, not just a trail, but like part of the mainstream, that it's not unusual. It's normalized.
Well, and I would just like to say that actually you guys should all be very proud of yourselves. I mean, I don't know Heather, but I know David and Jazz, and I knew them when they were very young, and I am so proud of you and the work you're doing. And the thing is, you might not feel proud now, or like Heather's saying, you keep that road open, you keep it going. But when you're like 64 and you're looking back, you'll be like, look at these people that were able to follow along. Look at these people that were given information to improve their career. They were given tips that you learned the hard way. And you all are doing that. And really, that is one of the best things you can give to the arts. Don't make the people learn it the hard way like you had to. Share, tell them that. It's wonderful, Heather, that you do that. Because sometimes we get selfish with our art. You know, like, well, you just learn it yourself. No. We grow the arts by throwing that out there, you know. And you guys are doing wonderful. I'll just be proud for you if you don't. You're proud of yourselves.
This will kind of lead into our next question, but Gina was talking earlier about roadblocks that she had with the crew guys not wanting to talk to her in person and people being surprised that she was a stage manager. What kind of roadblocks have you run into in your careers so far that have made it a little more difficult to keep going down that trail that you're traveling?
I'll say that I'll bring it right back to that, you know, being the chunky guy thing. You know, that right there, like that's not what people typically are wanting to come and see. When they're coming to see this, when they come to see Cinderella, they expect the prince to be, you know, 6'3" and 150 pounds, you know, like they're expecting, you know, someone that is not me. You know, I'm a bigger guy, I'm kind of short, I've got a bunch of curly hair, you know, that's not typically it. And I've been grateful because I've had some directors who have, you know, been gracious enough to say, you know what, okay, show me what you've got, you know, and have given me, you know, leading roles that I wouldn't have typically gone to someone that looks like me. And I'm super appreciative of that. But that's definitely, when I walk into the room, nobody thinks that I'm a dancer, because I'm not, but I can sell. By the end of that dance audition, you better believe that I'll have kept up, that I'll have sold you the choreography, and that, you know, but that's not the initial thought that people see when I walk into the room. They're like, oh yeah, he'll play the comic relief, you know, he'll be, you know, the funny chubby guy on the, you know, third guy in the chorus from the left. And I'm like, I'm so much more.
I think there's definitely been roadblocks, and it's really informed why I eventually just like, you know, I'll start my own, you know, and do it myself. And it's really been in multiple spaces. I started in technical theater, and one of my favorite things to do is lighting design. And when I, you know, go to calls, you know, working, you know, either with the union or anything like that, there could be, you know, anywhere from 75 to 150, you know, people working on a call, and you can count the number of African Americans you see, you know, on one hand. And typically there's maybe just one or two of us, you know, if it's a smaller call. It's just like, oh, hey, you do this too, great. And then when I tried to take that and bring it to try to make a career, I spent so much time growing up, like my family was super religious and, I grew up in church, and I saw job opportunities with these churches that were, trying to be more progressive and, have like lighting designers and things like that. And so I brought the talent and did it. And I got hired as an independent contractor, and then the roles would come available to get a full-time staff position. And it's like, well, who doesn't want that? Health insurance and a steady paycheck and, all of these things. And I would apply for the job that I was already doing and then, get passed over. And then this happened 2 or 3 times more until I finally asked, like, hey, you guys keep me on doing this as a contractor, and you say you like my work, and then you keep giving me other gigs, but you won't hire me as an employee. And then it was like this conversation around sexuality, and it's like, well, we can't hire you because you're gay. And it's like, all right, so there you swallow that pill. And then of course in the dance world, where the passion was to be a ballet choreographer or to create these ballet works, but to see that the door was not ready to be open in the ballet world for so many people, not just behind the scenes, to have a Black director and Black choreographers, which you still don't get a lot of. You don't see major companies bringing in these master ballet teachers that are African Americans. But then for someone to choose to cast African Americans in roles is still very much problematic for major ballet companies. There are people who still to this day, and as recent as 2019, will still have performers lighten their skin to perform certain roles, particularly Swan Lake, things like that. Ballet masters, are still ingrained in this one idea of what ballet should be. And so my whole thing was, I got it as a guy, I got it as a gay man, I got it as a Black guy, and it's like, but I love theater, and so, well, heck, I'll just start it and do it myself and hire myself, because all of those reasons just sounded foolish, but those were definitely roadblocks that I had experienced.
A recent one for me, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, this was shocking, and I proposing to do the show, Title of Show, if you guys are familiar with that musical, and they felt it needed a younger director. Hello? Really? I mean, are we into ageism now? Wow, am I that old? Because it seemed to me, looking back on being young would be a better place for a director to be in a show about young people who are starting their careers. But that's their choice, and they can make their own choices. But it was shocking to me to think like, okay, so got the stage manager thing going, I've moved into directing, and now there's a new roadblock. I'm an old lady, okay. I haven't run into it a lot, but I've wondered if that was like the dark future looming ahead, is suddenly like, I'm too old to direct shows about young people. Isn't that weird?
I think for me, as a playwright, and this I would probably say is for any currently living playwright, we all know theater is pretty much dominated by a bunch of old dead white guys' plays. And when people are selecting their seasons, those guys get 70% of the slots. And I'm not just talking Shakespeare, like all of it, all of the chestnuts, the canon, and that's in quotes. So for a new playwright to be considered it's very hard. Like Cincinnati Lab does the wonderful New Work series. Not a lot of theaters do those things. And it's this idea that like audiences, we think, and I'm going to say we in like quotes, we think audiences are afraid in quotes of new work when organizations are unwilling to give them main stage slots, because of course it's about money, and we know As You Like It makes so much money, and doing the same Christmas show and all those things. So the roadblock is challenging organizations to take new work seriously, that it is a valid story, even if the playwright lives in your town, even if the playwright doesn't look like you, even if the playwright came from a different background than Shaw. Those plays and stories are just as important as doing, My Fair Lady again. And so, and I know organizations struggle with this too because of money and things, but there are beautiful musicals written by incredible living playwrights that you just don't know about, that people will also buy tickets to if you put it on stage and market it and put your force behind it. So that's what I run into as a playwright. And I think a lot of us run into that to some extent, that idea that, oh, well, every year we do a Shakespeare musical, Christmas Carol, and then, oh, we'll do one experimental thing for one weekend. Like, challenging the idea of what is season programming, well, who gets their stories on stage, and how often do the same stories get told on stage?
How do we make sure as an industry that these voices are heard, that these stories are told, that it's not just about old dead white guys?
You have to hire the talent from, and I'm not just saying, performers. I'm talking directors, producers, as it was said, early on when we spoke, like it comes back to the company. It all comes back to that core value of wanting to include and, open up the theater world to something that it's not. Theater companies have to be willing to step out of their comfort zones and, give the people what they want.
And they need to understand that people want it. Because like Heather was saying, you get in these formula things or whatever, and sometimes they'll do an experimental show and be so surprised that all these people came, and they're often new audience members. Hello, that's how you build your subscription base, because the same old subscription base, they're going to die off eventually, but you need new fresh audience, and new fresh audience will come with new fresh works. Theater is supposed to be a brave art. And I think it's brave all the way up to the level of the administrators. Actors are terribly brave. Directors are brave. Writers are super, super brave, and everybody's willing to throw it out there. And then the people making the decisions are like, well, maybe not,
And it's that intentional word again, right? Like, I think there are Black performers out there who don't consider themselves an actor or this or that, but you go sit in somebody's Baptist church service and you listen to that choir, you see them dancers, and you see that church play, and you're like, you can clean up right there all the performers that you need. But it's like, has someone taken the time to say, you're really good? It's those people, you hear their voice and you go, you could get paid for that. You have it like in you. But somebody has to stop and take the time and say, yo, I see you and I value you. But if you don't do that, it's just never going to happen.
How do you think we're doing as an industry? Are we doing enough?
No. Not at all. I think we have taken steps towards being more inclusive, but not nearly as big a leaps as we need to as an industry. Like the talent is out there, the material is out there, the money is out there. Someone just has to be brave enough. We as an industry must be brave enough to to do something like they did in LA and cast a trans woman as Audrey in Little Shop. Like, these are things that are happening and people are loving it because it's representation. You're getting these stories out there to people and people want to see it, but you just have to, we have to be brave enough to actually take these leaps and go ahead and do it.
All right, so I want each one of you to answer this. What is your hope for our industry?
Kind of talked about this earlier, but that diversity becomes the norm. That it's not like, oh my God, there's a trans Audrey, or let's go see the Black Dance Company, or let's go see a show, and let there be people celebrated and represented on stage, and that's the expectation. And maybe we have conversations when that doesn't happen. Did you notice everybody kind of look the same? That's weird. That's what I want,
And as a director, stage manager type person, Because I learned so much, like my eyes are open so much this summer about the spaces that we create for performers to come in. And we've always been all about creating a relaxed space, a place where people felt creative. But to realize that it's so much more than that, that when a person comes into my space, they can be who they are. They can talk how they want to talk. They can own the space as much as anybody else, because we'll do better creative work when everybody in the company feels equally valued, equally relaxed. That's a space, whether they're Black or deaf performers, you know, that everybody is equal in that space. And it sounds like an easy thing to do, but it has to be, as David says, very intentional. But to go, who is this cast? What do these people need? And how do we make everybody comfortable so that we can all do good creative work? Because then those people will go on and continue to create those kind of spaces where they are. You know, it builds on itself, but we have to start it.
I would love to, for all like the theater as an art form, performing arts, to to blow the metaphorical dust off of the systems that we've allowed to just be the norm, and what we think of what does making a show supposed to look like, who's supposed to be in charge, and think about access, and that everyone's coming not only from different educational backgrounds, but also different places, so that theater doesn't feel like there's only one way to do it, that there's infinite ways to make theater. Theater is not owned by any group of people. It is truly a universal art form, so there should be an infinite way to do it that allows everyone to feel welcomed and invited in to tell these stories on stage.
My hope is just to be able to continue to share my gifts and my experiences on stage. Like, that's what I want to be able to do, in whatever capacity that is that, you know, I want to be able to share pieces of me with audiences, you know, night after night, because it's what I love to do. And that's very selfish of me. But because that's what my hope, you know, for the future of theater is in my very limited, narrow view right now, is that I get to continue to do it, especially because of the world that we're living in at the moment. Like, I just want to be back on stage.
All right, well, I think that's an excellent place to end this evening. So I would like to thank you all. Thank you, Gina, David, Heather, and Jazz, for being with me this evening. And hopefully we will get to have more of these conversations. Thank you.